All right. So why does a good God do bad things? And we're looking at this icon, and we're seeing that Christ is knocking, and we see that there's no handle. That means the door has to be open from the inside. Right? And so we know that our parents can force us to come to church. They can force us to go to hymn class, but they can't make us pray. They can force us to fast, but they can't make us be ascetic. They can force us to serve, but they can't force us to love. That has to come from us. And that has to be a door opening from the inside. Now, what's the person on the other side doing? First of all, who is that? There's an icon of him that I lifted to put on this icon. That's Peter, right as the rooster crowed 3 times. And Peter is ashamed. Okay? I don't think that's Peter. I think that's me. And what's Peter not doing? He's not opening the door. Why? Well, let's think about it. Why don't we let Christ in? Well, maybe he's scared of the consequences, right? Because when you let Christ in, things have to change. I don't want things to change. I like my life the way it is. I don't want to open up to God. I like it. I had lunch with someone today who said, he's there and I'm here. And we're okay like that. Maybe he's scared to be judged. He knows that when the door is opened, Christ is going to be judgmental, aggressive. Maybe he just doesn't like the feeling, right? In the Gospel of John, it says that the darkness hates the light because the light exposes, right? And we don't like to be exposed. None of us do. And so keep staring at it. Why else do you think he won't open the door? Maybe he's ashamed. This is a problem we all have. This is a problem that I know I have. That Christ knocks and I don't want to open. Just because I'm ashamed of what I've done and who I am. And I really can't handle that. And I don't want to expose myself. And I don't want anyone to know. Father, confession, I don't want myself to know how I really feel. I would rather even repress that from myself. Do people do that? Keep stuff from themselves? All the time. And so when I look at this icon, I see 3 things, right? He's not opening the door. He's not letting Christ in. And then I thought of a 4th thing, which is simply, maybe he doesn't know it's Christ. Maybe he hears a knocking, but he doesn't know who it is. He thinks it's something else. And so this is the part I want to focus on in today's talk. So let's think about this born blind man. So during Lent, we heard the story of a man who was born blind. And then the disciples asked him, who sinned? You guys know this story, right? This man or his parents? And so the question is, why did they ask him who sinned, this man or his parents? And this is what every philosophy professor, Philosophy 101, challenges you with in undergrad, right? He says, first day of class, he says, why does a good God do bad things? And all of us, you go, oh, I don't know. Dang, this guy's so smart, right? And this guy's been doing this with undergrad 18-year-olds for the last 30 years, right? So this is just fun for him or her. And he says, why is there famine? Why is there war? Why is there genocide? Why there's murder? Why there's pedophilia? Why are there all these horrible things that happen? How is God sitting around? He's so good, right? Letting all this happen. And then you're like, yeah, right? A good God doesn't do bad things, right? Right? In fact, that's why the disciples asked him, why is he blind? Right? There's no way the answer is something good. Right? The answer is someone sinned, this is punishment. And they framed the whole problem for him, right? They were thinking the same way the professor was thinking. A good God doesn't do bad things. Clearly this man sinned or his parents sinned, and then God is punishing them. We got God figured out. We know how God works, right? We're people. We know it all, right? And so then the question is, was this man's blindness God's will? Does God want him to be blind? Does God want people to be paralyzed? Does God want children, parents to lose their kids when they're 4? Does God want that? Are bad things God's will? And I kind of want to probe on this for a little bit. So let's think about, why did Jesus get crucified? Why did Jesus get crucified? Well, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish. He's the propitiation for our sins. I can never say that word. And not for ours only, but also the sins of the whole world. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life. For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So why did Jesus get crucified? All the good things, right? And St. Athanasius tells us that this wasn't the backup plan. This wasn't plan B. This wasn't, Adam fell, what am I going to do? I don't know. Maybe I'll have the Son of God become incarnated, and then he will die on behalf, right? This was always plan A, right? This is, God saw all of this. In fact, this is the only way God could truly show his love to mankind. Does that make sense? So this is God's plan. Can we agree? From the very beginning of time, to be crucified, right? But is that how the story went? Like, what actually happened? Wasn't Judas greedy? Weren't the Pharisees? Wasn't it the jealousy and hypocrisy of the Pharisees? Wasn't the chief priest's fear of the Roman wrath? Wasn't ultimately Pontius Pilate's call to kill Jesus out of fear of another uprising from the Jews? Are any of those things good? Do any of those things sound like God's plan? Nope. Bad, 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 bad. So wasn't it man's will that Jesus be crucified? Or was it God's will? Whose will was it? It was Judas who did it, right? Chief priests, Pontius Pilate, right? And it was completely their choice. And were their choices God's will? Was it God's will that Judas be greedy? Did God make Judas greedy and sell him? Did God push him and say, you sell him so that my plan can be fulfilled? Or was he completely independent and he completely made that call himself? We'd venture to say he completely made the call himself. Because God's will is love your neighbor as yourself. So God's will isn't be greedy and sell your master, who happens to be the Son of God and did really nice things to people, for 30 pieces of silver. That's not God's will. So to those people, Judas, the Pharisee, the chief priest, Pontius Pilate, did they do God's will? No, they did their will. So then what was Christ's response to all of this evil? All these evil participants doing all these evil things. He could have said, and this is what I would have said, I don't accept the cross. This is not God's will. This cannot be God's will. It's bad things that comes from bad people with bad intentions, right? Right? When someone does something to me and I go, look, I know why they said that. They said that because they're jealous of this or because they want this job. And so they're just trying to do that. So I'm going to fight that because I know where they're coming from. And this person's always been a jerk and she's always blah, blah, blah. She's out to get me, right? We do this, don't we? But then he said something very different. He said, Abba, Father, all these things are possible to you. If you are willing, remove this cup from me. Let's just stop there. What did he ask for? No cross. Cross sucks. Cross is painful. Cross hurts a lot. He asked for no cross. Remove this cup from me. Is it fair for us to say, please remove this cup from me? Of course it is. But then he finished it. That was you guys singing. Those guys, they harmonize. Why can't our deacons harmonize like that? They're so good. Just have like, ah. All right. That's to you, Simon. Okay, so all these... Simon's going to love me at the end of this. So, but then what did Christ say at the very end? He said, yet not what I will, but what you will. It's the perfect prayer. Anytime you guys get in a mess, say, God, remove this cup from me. I don't want this. But not my will, your will. And he says something very interesting. He says, all things are possible to you. So Christ recognized what? That something could have happened. He told the Father, you could stop this if you wanted to. You're allowing this to happen. And so did the Father allow a horrible thing to happen? That his Son, whom he loves, be crucified for a really, really bad reason by really, really bad people for the worst of intentions? Did God let a bad thing happen? And so, think about the story of Job. What did Satan do before he struck Job every single time? He asked God, hey God, can I kill his kids? And what did God say? Do it. So was it God's will that Job be tried like that? Yeah. God allowed it. Satan did it, but God allowed it. He let it happen. So does God allow bad things? Yeah. It's his will. Right? He's the pantokrator. He controls. And so when I see something happening, I can't say, oh no, that's outside God's will. That's her will. Let's continue. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied, have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the works of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to him, very well, then everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. So Satan asked God, and God said, do it. God let him do it. So we have to acknowledge that when these things occur to us, they are God's will. They were allowed by God. Even the cross, which was all bad will from lots of bad people, was allowed by God. And Jesus said, all things are possible to you. You can stop this, take this cup from me, but I will concede to your will. So we all have these crosses in our lives. All of you have a different one. And by the way, it's always fun to judge other people for their cross. It's just a pastime humans have. Say, oh, well, she's not handling her cross very well, and he's not doing a good job with his cross, right? But we all have crosses. And everyone is different, and everyone's very unique. And everyone is really calibrated on the person and their ability. Like in Orange County, when we moved to Orange County, my wife, we found she found a new primary care physician. So she went to the doctor first time, hi, blah, 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 meet. And so the doctor asks her, so what medications are you on? And my wife says, none. She goes, you're on nothing? And she said, no. And she goes, you're not on antidepressants? No. You're not on anti-anxiety medication? No. I'm a 45-year-old woman who's in Orange County. Life's pretty good. And then it turns out, we were telling a friend of ours who's also a doctor in that same practice, that goes to our church, she said over 50% of my patients, women, are on anti-anxiety medication. And these women have, 4 beach houses and 3 yachts, don't work, have a husband who's loaded, kids who are in Harvard, and they're on anti-anxiety medication because they can't handle the stress of their life. And so when we look at crosses, you can't judge a cross from the outside. I'm not judging those women of Orange County in any way, shape, or form. I'm letting you know what appears to me to be like the best freaking life on earth. And your only difficulty is where you get your nails done and when, and whether or not she gets the right color. Come on in. It's so nice out there. It's like heavenly. How do we get them to come in here? Simon, you go out there and you sing, and then have them come in here. Simon's over me. He's done. He's over me. That was the last one. He just gave me a look like.
Is that the last one?
It's not going to be from me, but it's the last one he's going to take, right? So I'm not saying that we should judge these women. What I'm saying is they're at their limit. Even though from the outside, I don't think they should be at their limit. I wouldn't be at my limit, but they are. And I acknowledge that they are at their limit. Their cross is different than my cross. And the way God gives them the cross is different than the way he gives me a cross. And the cross that I think, the cross that you have that I think is nothing, I love that cross. My cross you would think is easy, it's not. Right? Because it's very targeted and specific. So we have trouble in the service, we have boss or coworkers that are out to get me, we have children, difficult in-laws, parents, of course, siblings, friends that stab me in the back and gossip about me, that's a favorite pastime, all kinds of shaming and attacking and canceling on social media, meeting up with your friends and then not inviting you, then posting about it just to piss you off, right? All the good things, right, that happen, right? We have lots of excitement constantly, okay? So then how, as a Christian, do I see these things when they happen to me? Are those God's will for me? Does God will that those people do bad things to me? And here we must distinguish between two things. The actual deed that someone did and the situation that rises as a result of that deed. And this, I was reading one of the fathers just this last Lent, and this came full circle for me. So you're doing really well. It hit me at 51. And this distinction he talks about is very important. So it's not God's will that you ever hurt another person. But what if someone lies about you at work? Now that person's lie will create for you a very difficult situation. You may even get fired because someone lied about you. Is it God's will that someone lie? No. Is it God's will that someone hurt you? No. But now I'm fired because someone lied. What do I do? God does not will that someone slander you at work and that person will be judged, but here comes the difference. The consequence of that very difficult situation, God allowed to happen. He allowed you to be fired. He could have stopped it, but he didn't. Just like when Satan went to God about Job and said, let me get his kids, and God said, go for it. He could have stopped it, but he didn't. And so this situation came to you from God's hands. And that's the only way we can look at it. We accept it as God's will for me, for whatever reason it is. I may know the reason, I may not know the reason, I may never understand the reason. And so in some ways, our life is very arranged. And God allows challenging things to happen to us, sometimes because of evil other people do. And that's the mystery of how the world works. All these people doing all of these things, some good, some bad, some with good intention, some with bad, and yet it all comes together, just like the story of the crucifixion, to fulfill God's will, which was from the beginning of time. And it was the plan always. So God's will is to allow events that are difficult for us, like the cross, painful, just like he allowed Judas and the Pharisees to go through with their plan. And he didn't stop them. And we see this in the life of Pope Kyrillos. By the way, this is a drawing. It's pretty cool, huh? The priests in his own diocese, his own priests were plotting against him. You guys have probably heard the stories about Pope Kyrillos. He's the Pope, right? I mean, if a priest in if our diocese said something against Emba Serapion, they wouldn't dare, right? And now you're going to go up against the Pope, and write bad things about him. And he patiently accepted from them these trials as if from God. And his disciples we know the priests' names. Just finish them, excommunicate them, defrock them. You can do it like that. And he wouldn't. He's like, no. I'm going to accept what God is allowing these evil people to do to me because God allowed them to do it to me. It's evil. They shouldn't do it. It's a bad thing. They should probably confess. But what's happening, God allowed that for me. Because when we are impatient with what God allows for us to happen, we don't listen to what God is trying to tell us. We push, right? So we go back to the door knocking, and the door's knocking, and instead of opening, we push. We say, stay out. And the problem is when we see things coming from other people, It's when you humanize the event. You say, no. You see, what's happening is that guy said that to her, and now she's saying that because she's evil, and he's a jerk, and that's why he's going to act. And I take the thing and I put it down to the level of the people and my perceived intention in their hearts. And that's the most dangerous part. And when we do that, we're restless and we're angry and we're unsettled and we don't settle. Because I see it as a person doing something to me. I don't take it from the hands of God. And so what happens, and unfortunately this is something that happens a lot in your generation, is the victim mentality. You see, that person did that to me. And that person is trying to get me. And that person said this about me. And this is the spiritual disease, honestly, of our time. Everything that happens, no one takes from the hand of God. Everyone sees as another person. And as soon as you pin it to another person, you lose what God is trying to do for us. And so everyone becomes a victim to everyone else's sins. And it just kind of continues, right? I mean, when we think of even like, every once in a while you'll hear someone say, I'm like this because my dad was like this, and my dad made me like this, right? And then you talk to the dad says, well, that's because Giddu was like this, right? And Giddu was a jerk, and that's why I'm a jerk, and that's why you're a jerk, right? And we can keep going, can't we? Do people blame Adam? If only Adam hadn't sinned, if we wouldn't be in this mess, if only Adam, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to go all the way back to Adam, and you'll do that, right? And the victim mentality will take you right there. Right? You'll just blame someone else, right? And absorb that and feel persecuted. And what I've done when I do that is I've taken this situation out of the hands of God and say, God is no longer the Pantokrator. He's no longer in control of the situation. That guy is. And this is what Jesus could have done with Judas. He could have said, I'm not going on no freaking cross. For Judas? For 30 pieces of silver? He's a piece of work. I discipled him for 3.5 years. Look what he did. I'm not going up there. I'm not going on that cross. I'm not going to carry that cross. I'm not going to bear that cross. Right? And that cross for us could be a lot of things. Persecution, or getting fired, or having people talk about you. Right? There's lots of crosses that we bear because of the result of an evil of another person. And so, going back to the beginning, why don't we let Christ in? Sometimes we don't know it's Christ. Sometimes we think it's Simon Fahmy, right? And you're like, I'm not letting Simon Famy's evil, right? So that's the problem. I don't know it's God. I don't know the work he's trying to do in me, so I push back. And I use the excuse of that's just an evil person doing an evil thing. And my job is to oppose that kind of evil person, as opposed to being docile. So what I encourage all of us to do is to see the situation and not the people. This is something I should do. Right? You should see the situation and not the person behind the situation. Right? So for every one of us, we get bitter cups that the Father offers us to drink. And they happen all the time, right? If you think it's like a one-time deal, good luck, right? I hate to break it to you, they keep coming, right? It's going to be, the boyfriend that stabs you in the back, and the girlfriend that cheats on you, and then the teacher that fails you, and the guy that's out to get you, and the abuna, and the servant, and the wife, and the husband, and the kid, and it just doesn't really end until you're dead, right? That's just, that's right. So, just thought I'd be uplifting for a moment. And so, we don't recognize it as coming from God because it's usually coming from other people, right? It's my husband. He's a jerk. It's simple, right? This isn't from God. It's from him. And he's not just a jerk. He's other words that I don't want to say because I'm wearing this black thing, right? And so a spiritual writer says, it was not the Father's will that anyone kill his son, nor did he inspire anyone to kill him. He did will, however, that Jesus would freely be the sacrifice for the sins of mankind. He willed that Jesus would let himself be put to death. And so this is the part we miss when we push back. We have to assent to God's will. And this is hard, yeah.
So would you say then that like everything that happens to us is God's will? Because if it wasn't, He would have stopped it from happening.
I think that way, yes. And the key is accepting and assenting. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Anyone here ever go to PT, physical therapy, or a massage, right? And then you're on the person is like working on a part of you that hurts, okay? Like your shoulder hurts, physical therapy, okay? And they're pushing on something that hurts, right? You have an injury. So you tense, okay? And oftentimes I've been told, please relax, right? It's not going to work if you push against me, right? So once I tense up that muscle because I'm protecting myself from the pain, she can't get to or he can't get to the part that they got to get to, right? And so assenting to God's will is untensing, is letting it happen, right? Accepting, what am I going to learn from this thing? Even if it looks as ugly as the most perfect man who ever walked the earth, suffering the most horrible death in the most horrible situation. Right? And so it's almost as if Christ gives us the extreme case scenario. Right? I'm going to take it to the limit. And I'm going to say, I'm the perfect man and died the most horrible way that existed on the planet at the time for the worst reason. And there it is. And then when I did, I said what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And it's just those few words that he said throughout the cross that really model for us everything about Christian life. You know, the Feast of the Cross was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. And the newly canonized Saint Abuna Bishoy Kamil loved the Feast of the Cross. And the reason is that the cross isn't about, oh, that's our salvation and that's how God paid our debt and, you know, it's so great. It's not that. The cross, that's our guy, right? I mean, we wear these things. We put them on the churches. We put them in our cars. We put them everywhere, right? Why? Because this is how it ends for all of us, right? It ends being crucified by a friend, by a family member, by a sibling, by a boss, by an employee, by your kids, definitely by your kids, right? This is how it ends. And it happens over and over. And at the end of every crucifixion is what? A resurrection, right? And that's the cycle of Christian life. And once we reject this guy, and we say, I'm not interested, do people reject the cross? I mean, isn't a trial in my life supposed to bring me closer to God? Does it always work? Do you know people who've had trials in their life and brought them further away from God? Yeah, I do. I know tons. Does that happen? All the time. When did it happen first? At the very first cross? I mean, what's Jesus' ratio on the very first cross? 50-50? We got a right-hand guy and a left-hand guy, right? One of them says, the left-hand guy says what? Get me off the cross. Not interested. I don't want your cross. I don't want to die like this. Right? I don't want the cross. And the other guy says, I guess I'm on this cross. I just want you to be with me. And I want to be with you. So those are the two prayers that we ask when we get crosses in our life.
Isn't he 2 for 3?
Who's the third?
Simeon. What's his name? The one that gets asked to carry the cross.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I can't. He didn't get crucified. He was on the cross.
No, but he
carried the cross. We are all Simeon. We're all Simon. Happy? There. Call out. Shout out for you. Fair enough, right? But no, I reject that. I still say 1 out of 50-50.
It has a nicer ring.
Yeah, that's true. I'll think about that a little bit more. But and you see, the cross does this, right? The cross divides, right? I mean, you look at the soldiers, right? One of them puts a spear in his side. Another one says, truly this was the Son of God, right? You have one disciple betraying him and another disciple standing at the cross with him. You have some Pharisees egging on the crowd saying, crucify him. And the other disciples, Nicodemus and Josephus, take down his body and bury them in their own grave. The cross divides. And the difference is seeing it for what it is. Right? And as soon as I humanize the cross, if Jesus had done that, he would have rejected it. And he would have been like the left-hand guy. I got a bum rap. The judge wasn't fair to me. This isn't okay. I have a long life to live. There's really good reasons why I shouldn't be on this cross. Victim, victim, victim. The other guy just said, be with me. I want to be with you. Carry the cross with me. All right, so assenting to this cross, that's the key. Don't push. Detense the muscles. Let God do what he needs to do in you. Yeah, raise your hand up.
I'm going to kill you.
Huh?
I'm going to kill you.
You're going to kill me? Oh, yeah.
What about children? Because we know they can't assent nor dissent.
What about children?
Yeah, children, the suffering of children, right?
Oh.
Because they can't assent, they can't dissent, they wander blind in the world. They often don't have a sense of self, right?
I mean, look, the answer is I have no idea. I mean, I'm not going to explain why God does anything. I'm not going to even try. I mean, obviously children have parents, right? So the parents, I mean, when a child suffers, believe me, the child doesn't suffer like the parent suffers, right? No matter what you think you're going through, what your parents feel when you're in pain is way more than the pain you have. And you'll know that in a couple decades, right? So I don't know, right, why it's happening, right? There's lots of other parties. There's a million reasons, at least a million. And I couldn't tell you which one it is or pick which one it is. And nor should we try. All right, so the reason is instead of seeing the event, we see the people behind the event. Clear? I think I made this point 30 or 40 times. And so I want to read you the story about King David. I just want to kind of finalize the point, and then you guys can keep asking more questions. So King David was walking along once. This story is in Judges. And this man from Saul's family, now you guys know the story. Saul was the king before David, right? That David, took over for. A man from Saul's family came out and cursed him, and he started throwing rocks at David. Now, David's the king. There's like guards around David, all very heavily armed, and this guy's throwing rocks. So it's kind of like this scene from a Monty Python movie, right?
I'm not gonna get that reference.
Yeah, no one's going to get that reference.
Did anyone get that?
Did anyone watch Monty Python? You guys really need to watch The Life of Brian and or The Holy Grail, right? It's a funny scene. These are classics, people. Watch them. All right, so, you're pelting the king with rocks. You're cursing him, right? And so the guard of King David, turns, and I love this quote. He says, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." Right? Which is what you'd expect the captain of your guard to say to you, right? Let me go kill the guy, right? Just touch your nose when you want me to kill him. And then King David said, and I love this quote, "What does this have to do with you? Like, you stay out of this. If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" Look what he said. The Lord said to him, "Curse David." Then he continued, "Leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord told him to do it." So when King David, so this guy was, by the way, and if you hear the stuff he was saying about King David, it was actually factually wrong. Like, he was saying things that were just incorrect, right? He had bad info, okay? He was like on bad Instagram pages, apparently, okay? So he's saying the wrong things. He's throwing rocks. He's cursing. He's off. And what does David react? What's his reaction? The Lord told him to curse me. And so God, he allowed this man to curse him because he wanted to learn this lesson in humility. Yeah.
So how are you able to distinguish between what the Lord tells somebody and what Satan tells somebody? Because Satan could have easily whispered, "Oh, you should curse out David." But in this scenario, you're saying, "Oh, the Lord said it." Like, how are you supposed to be able to...
Oh, no, I think Satan told him to do it.
Yeah, so like in reality though, like how are we supposed to implement that into our lives?
You don't. Because Satan did tell him to do it, but the Lord allowed him. Like, so in the very first part of the talk, we talked about how everything is allowed by God. So in the story of Job, Satan says, "I want to go kill his kids," and God says, "Okay, do it." Right? So everything is allowed. So when you say, is that God's will? Is that his will? Is that her will? Is that my will? Is that my will with God's will? Then you can just go lose your mind, right? And when we start doing that, does God want me to go get a red car? Does God want me to get a blue car? Well, I did see a blue car drive by, so maybe that's what God wants. And maybe I should go to dental school, but I don't know. But maybe I should. And I don't know what God wants. Maybe God wants me to go here. Maybe God, you're going to lose your mind.
Well, isn't the whole point of everything that happens in our life due to our own free will? So obviously God's allowing it because he gave us that right. So technically who are we to say we know what God's will is? We don't know.
Exactly.
It's God.
So that okay. So the first part of the talk we talked about this.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I can.
That's my bad.
No, it's okay. I'll go back in a minute. All right. Any other? Or you had another comment? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna run up on her question. Wouldn't God allow me to take a spear to the guy that's throwing out curses at me? You talk about God allowing everything. So if God allows me to answer sword with sword, then why do we care?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I know we lost
I think
context.
it's kind of the same point as where I was headed. It's more how can we say it's God's will when it's my own will? I'm the one making the conscious decision to, in this scenario, stab someone who's cursing at me.
So in the beginning of the talk, we talked about the crucifixion of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And we said that, why was Christ crucified? And we said this is why Jesus was crucified, right? For God so loved the world, and he came as a propitiation. Someone say that for me.
Propitiation.
Propitiation. That's better. Propitiation. Shh. All right. I'm not that smart. So, for the wages of sin and death. Okay, so this is why Christ was crucified, right? And so we can say, and St. Athanasius tells us that this was God's will from the beginning of time for the. But then when you look at the story, right, Judas sold him. The Pharisees were jealous and had hypocrisy. The chief priests feared this. Pontius Pilate did that, right? So lots of evil people did lots of evil things that God allowed to do. They were not prevented. They're not good things. God didn't make them do those things. But their evil came together to fulfill God's will. And then Christ, when he saw the cross, he could have simply said, this is not God's will. This is Judas and the Pharisees and the chief priests and a bunch of monkeys, right? I'm not interested in this. But he didn't, right? Instead, he said the opposite. He said, all things are possible to you, which means, Father, you can stop this, right? If you're willing, remove this cup from me. I don't want this cross, but I accept your will. So he accepted it as if it's from God's hand when we just saw that it's from a bunch of guys, none of who were very nice. Right? And so he didn't make that distinction. He didn't say, well, Satan told Judas, and so that's how you lose your mind real fast.
Can you touch on maybe, because I feel like I've always had this question, and I feel like what clarified it a little more for me was God's causative will. I feel like a lot of times we think that God causes things rather than allowing them, which kind of gets us to go down this
in the end, I don't think it really matters, right? If he allowed it, if he caused it, whatever, he allowed it. Right, and he allowed it for good, and when he let Job suffer all those things, he allowed it for good, right? And you see in the story of Job, right, in the very beginning, when all these things happen to Job, Job says, he starts off really good, right? He says, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked I shall return. Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? It's great, nice, canned Sunday school answer, right? And Job said it perfectly. Then, the book of Job is 40-something chapters. So all of a sudden, he starts talking and all this vile stuff comes out. He starts cursing God. He starts getting pissed. He's like, I offered sacrifices. I did all the right things. I was never, nothing ever lacked in my worship. Why is he doing this to me? What kind of blah, blah, blah. So then it's like God said, there's this one part of your heart we got to poke at a little bit, right? There's some imperfection there. And then God talked to him And then he repented of that piece. And then he became better than before, and then all the things came back. Yes?
Sorry, question. So, I think like we're trying to compare like how God handles situation like his crucifixion, but would you think it's unfair to compare God to us like humans handling? Like you're trying to set an example of how God did this, and it happened to God. Like it was good, bad intentions, will, not will, but this is God that we're talking about. Like his capacity to handle a situation like those is totally different than ours. So what do you think about this?
I mean, of course, right? But we're called to be the image and likeness of Christ, right? I mean, we're called Christians. You know, we wear this thing, right? So we're called to be everything he was, we're called to be. He was the perfect human, and we're aspiring to be like that. Obviously, you know, we're not going to be like that. And that's why, you know, in the epistles it says, you're never given a temptation that you can't handle. You'll never given a cross that you can't bear, right? So every person's cross is custom, you know. I don't think I could, you know, be on earth, be God, and then have a bunch of, you know, fools kill me and me just stay silent, right? I think my ego's too big for that, right? His obviously was not. So what you're going to get isn't that. You can't handle that. Yes?
So I think right now we're kind of operating under the assumption that God's overall will, as in like allowing bad things to happen, is going to like balance out in the end, given the example that you said, how like all these bad things happened to him, but that's what led to the crucifixion, right? But this isn't like my personal opinion, but we had a talk last quarter, I can't remember who gave it, but the entire like point of the talk was to say, who are we, like we have an assumption, all of us, like who are we to say that the point of God is to like do good in our lives? Again, I'm not saying I agree with this, but like the point of the talk was like, God allows suffering. Like who's to say like God wants us to like live happy, non-suffering lives? Because in reality, like being Christian, like God's life, like our point as a Christian is to live the most Christ-like that we can. God's life was suffering, like you said, like everything he did, he endured like sufferings from these like monkeys. So he said.
I love that you use that word.
He said like the point was basically that we should wake up every day, and this was a bit extreme, but to pray to God like, let me suffer today, let me like endure as much as I can to be as resilient as you were. So I'm just like wondering why we're assuming kind of that. I just feel like those, again, it's not like you delivered that other talk, but like it's kind of like a bit contradictory that like one is saying like, oh, we shouldn't assume that God is here to direct our lives in the best ways possible. He's like here to like make sure we all get into like the top schools and all that stuff. Whereas another perspective is to say like, no, like we're on this earth to suffer and to be strong and to, you know, live like Christ did.
I don't see a contradiction at all. Like as you were describing the other talk, I've given many talks like that one. I agreed with everything you said. So I'm wondering what I said that makes you think there's a contradiction. Like I don't think. And I think I'm going to get to it in one of these slides. Is this idea of so we get back to why does a good God allow bad things, which is the title, right? And then I think we come back to, is it a bad thing, right? And what does that word mean, you know? And so I don't think that God's job is to, you know, make it all, you know, rainbows and unicorns, right? And that his job is to make my life easy on earth. Right? And every time my life isn't easy on earth, I have to call to him and say, make my life easy on earth, right? That's not the point, right? I mean, and the point is to walk through the suffering of earth, the human condition, death that entered the world and the disease that entered the world and the injustice that entered the world. We walk through it with him as he walked through it, right? And that's the whole point, is we just walk, just like the right-hand thief, I want to be with you on this cross, right? I don't want to leave the cross, and because you're on the cross. So I don't think I don't see the inconsistency. I think they're actually very consistent, right? And so the point is, if God's point isn't to make my life, you know, what did I say? Rainbows and unicorns. I was going to go with puppies and something, but then I thought rainbows and unicorns. So if the point isn't rainbows and unicorns, right? So then, you know, then when I see something knocking that doesn't look like a rainbow or unicorn, the beginning of the talk was, why am I not letting Christ in? And it's sometimes I don't know that it's Christ. I think it's Joe Blow, right? And she's doing that and he's doing that. Versus, no, this is God doing something good for me. Now, I may not appreciate it. I may recognize it. I may hate him for it, whatever, right? You know, when my kid was 1 and I took him to the doctor and this strange man took a very sharp thing and stuck it in his arm, right? And he screamed and started crying. He immediately looked at me and thought, you know, you're going to punch out the doctor now, right? This is where you protect me, you know? And all I did was hold him down tighter, you know? And he's looking at me very confused, right? And I wasn't about to explain to him antibodies and vaccines at the time, right? Just shut up and take the shot, right? Let's end the pain, right? So, and nor will I, you know, nor did I feel the need to explain to him a vaccine at that moment, right? And just, you know, here's a lollipop, you know, and we'll call it a day, right? But he thinks my role is to protect him and which it is, but I'm going to protect him from something, you know. And as a parent, right, you have to be careful, right? I mean, we have, you know, you've all heard of helicopter parents, right? Which is a thing now. And then there's now a new term, bulldozer parents, right? The bulldozer parents just plow for their kids, right? And the question is, yeah, you're going to get your kid into some Ivy League school, or you're going to, you know, by cheating for them on the SAT and do all these things, right? But then what's good for that kid, right? You know, and sometimes it's good to let them, you know, like, I mean, I always use this example, like when my son was learning how to walk, right? I mean, in the beginning, we'd move everything out of the way, you know, and he's taking his steps and there was no, and then after a while, I'm like, you know, no, let's just let him, you know, figure it out, right? You know, he'd get to a lip, or, you know, right at, you know, go out the patio, it's, you know, 2 inches. And, you know, my wife's like, oh, he's going to fall. I'm like, yeah, he will. That's okay. I got him. Right? You know, you just kind of hold a finger and he's looking at it and he's sizing it up, right? And then he takes a step and, you know, the first time he didn't do so well. The next time he figured out, oh, that thing does that thing to me, right? I can't cheat him from that opportunity. If I carry him over the step every single time, he'll never take a step. He'll never know how to do that, right? So I let him fall. And I watched him, and then I picked him right up. Good job, Habibi, lollipop, and then we just move right along, right? And so as a father, you don't just plow for your kids. I want them to feel things, and I want them to overcome them, but I'm going to be right here, right? And if you need me, I jump in, you know? Good?
Yeah.
That's a good question. All right. Ever tell you guys a story? I always told you the story. I always tell the story. It's one of my favorite stories. You know this one, right, Amanda? If you die before you die, this is one of my favorite quotes. I'm sure you all heard me say this quote many times. And I think this is kind of the importance of allowing suffering in our lives. Because what suffering does, and I'm not just talking about suffering for the sake of suffering. I'm talking when God allows something to happen, like let's go back to the child walking scenario. Easily, my son could look at me and said, really, you let me trip on that lip? Why wouldn't you pick me up? Why wouldn't you point it out? Why wouldn't you tell me about it? Why wouldn't you show me how to step? I mean, you can make those arguments, right? And there's a point. There's something that you didn't know how to do, and the only way you're going to figure out how to do it is you're going to fall. And that's how you're going to figure it out. Or maybe I'll catch you a little bit. I don't mean to make you fall on your face, right? But I need you to stumble in it, right? Because if I don't, you just never will, right? And so I love this quote because this is really the focus of Christian life, right? If you die before you die, then you won't die when you die, right? And so what is this death? What is this cross, right? And, you know, obviously this is the Feast of the Cross. It was, you know, yesterday. The point of the crucifixion is there are parts of us that react badly when someone pisses us off. Someone attacks us, right? Someone insults us, okay? And those parts, when you look at them, every time you get upset at anyone, I'm gonna go ahead and put a bet down. I know why you did. It's your ego, right? Every time she shouldn't have talked to me like that, and after everything I did for him, and everything, blah, 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 and my mom does not appreciate my sibling, and my blah, blah, right? We'll all bring it down to ego. It's always the same thing, right? And so the reason your sister ate your food and then spit on you, right? And the reason God didn't strike her down with lightning when she did was because, and sisters do that. I'm just kidding.
What sisters did you have?
I didn't have any sisters, but I have a daughter. So anyway, I watched my daughter, you could tell if I said this, right? I watched my daughter just like psychologically torture my son, right? She would just, and she would just watch him, and she would just wait for him and just go, pa, and he'd go, ah, and he just loses his mind. And she would smile inside, and I'm like, it's not okay. She's like, all I said was ha, or something. And she knows exactly what she's doing. There's surgical strikes designed to torment him. So yes, I know. I've seen it. Okay. And so I would allow this to happen, and I was encouraging it, right? Because I would just look at him and go, why are you such an idiot? Right? All she said was, pa. And he goes, the way she said it, and she knows I hate that. And da-da, like, well, then you need to get over whatever it is. And she's there, God sending her and not striking her down to make sure that you learn that when she says, you don't react like an idiot, which is what you're doing currently, right? So the part of you that's reacting has to what? Die. Right? And God allows things like your sister to kill it, right? By continually poking at it, right? So I'll tell you a story about Abbot. How many people have heard me tell this story? Everyone? Who has not heard the story? Everyone's heard the story?
They don't even know what the story is. No,
All right, so the story is... Sorry. So the story is, Abbot Tryphon is this monk. He's on Vashon Island in Seattle. It's an island off the coast of Seattle. He has a wonderful monastery. In fact, this sticker is from his monastery. And he was at a Starbucks once. He sat down. He's getting his coffee. And, he's sitting right here, and there's a guy here. You know how Starbucks is, right? And there's a guy right there, okay, right in front of him. And so the guy that's right here looks at the guy that's here and says, only a stupid old man would believe in God. Nice and loud. Right? So Abbot Tryphon's here. He proceeds to finish his coffee. He waits a few minutes. He gets up. He walks over to the cashier and he says, you see those two gentlemen over there? I'd like to buy a gift certificate for each of them. But I want to ask you a favor. I don't want you to give it to them until after I leave. 5 minutes. He said, okay. So he paid her. He left. 2 months later, he happens to be at the same Starbucks. He sees the two guys. They immediately come up to him and they say, we will need to ask you a question. Why did you buy us a gift certificate the last time when you knew what we said and was about you? And he said, my God is a God of love, and we don't repay evil with evil. We repay evil with love. And so that's the only choice I had. That's the only thing we do. And so the guy who said the really harsh thing starts crying. And he starts opening up to him. And he starts talking about his problems and what he went through. And for 3 hours, the two of them talk. And he makes him feel better. And thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciated that. I needed to hear those things, blah, 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 right? So the point of the story, and the reason it's up against this quote, is why was Abbot Tryphon able to have that discussion? Is because when the guy said to him, only a stupid old man would believe in God, what was his reaction? He didn't react. Why didn't he react? He was dead. The part of him that reacted, and I don't know if you guys know, you can see he's a big guy. He used to be like a bouncer, right? He used to fight people. He was an angry man, right? He would beat people up. So he was very capable of that, right? And he basically killed the part of him that reacted. Does that make sense? That's so funny.
No, it's because I answered your question. I said, he killed himself. He started laughing.
You killed that small part, right? Yeah, not the whole thing, right? And so this is what I was trying to get my son to do about the part when his dog and the sister would say blah to him, right? You have to let those. So when people piss us off, you have to realize that the battle doesn't go with the person. It has to go internal, right? What part of me is pissed off, and why am I pissed off? And we have to think about these things. See, God sent me this message. Really, this is for none of you guys. This is just for me today. All right. So this is kind of the quote that you were talking about. Things Jesus never said. Listen to your heart. Be true to yourself. Trust your gut. Feel good about who you are. Happiness is what matters. Just be a good person. Things Jesus actually said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Right? So this is the Christianity we follow. We don't follow the prosperity gospel. We don't follow, if I fast Lent, then I get an A in organic chemistry model.
Probably not even enough.
That's not enough, right? I mean, not for organic, but for like algebra or something. Yeah, that's enough. Yeah, it'll do. It's good enough, right? Or you show up like to a couple of liturgies right before finals because God's that stupid, right? He's like, oh, you showed up to liturgy. That's an extra 10 points. All things we do, people. All things we do. All right. Does anybody have any questions, comments, criticisms, complaints, conundrums, qualms? Any other questions? They're all very good questions. Reconcile with other talks from previous generations? Nothing. All right. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Thank you guys for having me.